Today, with COVID, we have no other choice. And climate adaptation is simply too important to postpone this global meeting any longer. So let's all embrace the benefits that are also there. We have a smashing outreach with 30 presidents, prime ministers, heads of state, 50 ministers participating, 300 speakers from all over the world, and about 15,000 registrations. So I'm very happy with that.
Yeah, and it's a smaller footprint too.
Of course, and no security problems. There are also a lot of benefits.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Ban Ki-moon, Your Excellency, you have been a driving force behind adaptation action. What is your hope for this summit?
Well, it's a great pleasure, first of all. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for hosting this very important summit meeting, and also Minister Cora van Huysen. And also I see Secretary General Antonio Guterres of the United Nations, and I'm also very much honored to participate as a co-chair of this inaugural Climate Adaptation Summit meeting. When I reflect on how we have responded to the global pandemic and what lessons we might have learned these past years, one quality shines through. That is the power of global partnership and collaboration. That's the most important things. In this regard, I'd like to take this opportunity to highly commend the visionary leadership of President Joe Biden of the United States for his decisive action to rejoin the Paris Climate Change Agreement as the first act of his presidency. This means the multilateralism, which has been in disarray during the last 4 years, is now back. Thanks to this spirit of collaboration, we now have promising pathways back to health. If we can do this to fight the pandemic, we can certainly do this and more to help hundreds of millions of people adapt to the accelerating impacts of climate change. We need to start building a better future now. The Paris Agreement recognized that mitigation and adaptation go hand in hand, that they are two equally important building blocks towards a sustainable world that leaves no one behind. Over the past 2 years, the Global Commission on Adaptation has worked hard to elevate the importance of climate adaptation. That work will now be succeeded by the Global Center on Adaptation, based in the Netherlands and led by my very able colleague, Dr. Patrick Verkooyen. The GCA's inaugural State and Trends in Adaptation report focused on the context of COVID-19. It stated that we need the 5 to 10-fold increase in funding for adaptation for just the developing world, and yet only a tiny fraction of the trillions of dollars in economic stimulus funds announced so far are being earmarked for climate adaptation. That we have to increase. The main three pillars of our summit is that raise ambition, increase, mobilize finance, as well as forge a partnership. We need a step change in adaptation to protect the world, and especially the most vulnerable people and countries from climate impact. Those of us gathered here today are in the best place to deliver it. The world has a golden opportunity to recover from our health and economic crisis by accelerating adaptation, and we must seize it. You have, I think all of us, global leaders, have a political and moral responsibility to save humanity and our planet. I sincerely hope that with all this multilateral returning back, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, you really take this opportunity to change the world. And I count on your strong leadership. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. And let's indeed talk to your successor at the United Nations, Mr. Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Your Excellency, we are delighted that you are able to join us live. Welcome. On December 12th, the world celebrated the 5th anniversary already of the Paris Agreement, and we have already seen a lot of commitments on getting to net zero. Do you think we are going fast enough when it comes to adapting to a climate that's changing so fast?
Not yet fast enough, but Excellencies, dear friends, I thank Prime Minister Mark Rutte, Minister Cora van Nieuwenhuizen, and my dear friend Ban Ki-moon for inviting me to address this important summit. And I thank the Global Commission on Adaptation for its leadership. We begin this year with a heightened awareness of the importance of resilience. The COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us that we cannot afford to ignore known risks. And climate disruption is a risk we are well aware of. The science has never been clearer. We are facing a climate emergency, and we are already witnessing unprecedented climate extremes and volatility affecting lives and livelihoods on all continents. According to the World Meteorological Organization, there have been more than 11,000 disasters due to weather, climate and water-related hazards over the past 50 years at a cost of some $3.6 trillion. Extreme weather and climate-related hazards have also killed more than 410,000 people in the past decade, the vast majority in low and lower middle-income countries. And this is why I have called for a breakthrough on adaptation and resilience. We need the trillions of taxpayers' dollars funding the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic to jumpstart the low-carbon, high-resilience future we need. But recovery cannot be only for the developed world. We must expand the provision of liquidity and debt relief instruments to developing and middle-income countries. The lack of resources to relaunch their economies, that lack the resources to relaunch their economies in a sustainable and inclusive way. And I see 5 priorities to guarantee adaptation and resilience. First, donor countries and multilateral, regional and national development banks need to significantly increase the volume and predictability of their finance for adaptation and resilience. The recent United Nations Environment Programme Adaptation Gap Report calculates annual adaptation costs in developing countries alone to be in the range of $70 billion. These figures are likely to reach 140 or eventually up to $300 billion in 2030, and the range between 280 and 500 billion in 2050. But huge gaps remain on financing for adaptation in developing countries. That is why I've called for 50% of the total share of climate finance provided by all developed countries and multilateral development banks to be allocated to adaptation and resilience in developing countries. Adaptation cannot be the neglected half of the climate equation. The African Development Bank set the bar in 2019 by allocating over half of its climate finance to adaptation. And I urge all donors and multilateral development banks to commit to this goal by COP26 and deliver on it at least by 2024. And I welcome today's commitment made by Prime Minister Mark Rutte on behalf of the government of the Netherlands. Let us remember that developed countries must meet the commitments made in the Paris Agreement to mobilize $100 billion a year from private and public sources for mitigation and adaptation in developing countries. Second, all budget allocations and investment decisions need to be climate resilient. Climate risk must be embedded in all procurement processes, particularly for infrastructure. And developing countries must receive the necessary support and the tools to achieve this. The United Nations system is ready to support this effort worldwide. Third, we need to significantly scale up existing catastrophe-triggered financial instruments, such as the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility and the African Risk Capacity. And I call also on donors, the multilateral development banks, and private finance institutions to work with vulnerable countries on developing new instruments with innovation to incentivize investments in resilience building. For every dollar invested in climate resilient infrastructure, $6 can be saved, as Prime Minister Mark Rutte just said. Fourth, we need to ease access to finance, especially for the most vulnerable, and expand debt relief initiatives. The share for least developed countries and small island developing states in total climate finance remains small, representing only 14% and 2% of flows respectively. And these countries stand on the line of the climate crisis. Yet, due to size and capacity constraints, they face significant challenges in accessing climate finance to build resilience. There must be a collective effort to remove these obstacles. And finally, we need to support regional adaptation and resilience initiatives. This would allow, for example, debt for adaptation swaps, for example, for the Caribbean or the Pacific Islands, and provide much needed liquidity to vulnerable countries in dire need. Excellencies and dear friends, support for adaptation and resilience is a moral, economic, and social imperative. Today, 1 person in 3 is still not adequately covered by early warning systems, and risk-informed early approaches are not at the scale required. As illustrated by the Global Commission on Adaptation, just 24 hours warning of a coming storm or heat wave can cut the ensuing damage by 30%. We need to work together to ensure full global coverage by early warning systems to help minimize these losses. We have the tools, skills, and opportunities to deliver more, faster, and better adaptation actions. I hope this summit helps to secure the breakthrough on adaptation and resilience that is needed, and that it leads to ambitious outcomes at COP26. Let us live up to our responsibilities and jointly change course towards a sustainable, fair, and resilient future, and I thank you.
And I thank you, Secretary General Guterres. And stay with us, please. Well, let's move to Africa, where climate change is felt on a daily basis. President Akufo-Addo from Ghana, Your Excellency, thank you very much for sharing your action. Can you hear us? President
Yes,
Akufo-Addo, can you hear us?
Me?
Could you share your action
Yes,
with us,
I can
please?
hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you very well.
You hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. All right. Okay.
Please share your